Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. In this episode, we discuss Ben's recent spring trip to the backwoods of Utah and how our appreciation for nature improves as we learn the intimacies of the location. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Oh, how are you settling in now that you're back from your trip, Ben?
Pretty good, pretty good. I definitely got very wiped out on this one. I don't know how many. Do you have a Fitbit or anything like that to keep track of stats when you are out in the field at all?
I did for a little bit, but it wasn't working out for me. Like, kept malfunctioning or something. So I don't use it.
Yeah, I think it was back in 2019 that I started wearing a Fitbit because I was curious about the amount of calories I was burning. I know it's just an estimate, but that and the steps and distances. And it's especially interesting to wear it on the backpacking trips because the trip I just got back from, it a few days ago, and the last time we were recording was the day before I left. I was doing about 15 miles a day for 6 days straight, and according to the Fitbit, I was burning somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 calories a day. And
wow,
yeah, and
that's quite a bit.
Yeah, and with the amount of food to take on the backpacking trip, I can't replenish that much. And at a certain
You had
point, I
talked
just hit
about
a
that
wall.
before in a video, didn't you?
Yeah, and because when I'm photographing close to my vehicle, I can just pound calories, and has worked out very well. Where I would just like add some olive oil to some of the freeze dried meals and stuff like that. But on the backpacking trips, man, it's at a certain point I do end up hitting a wall. At least it's good to look at the stats and to say, okay, this is why I'm feeling very sluggish. It's just because my body's telling me I just need to relax.
I wonder if there are any more like calorie dense. Like, I know Cliff Bars are huge on like carbohydrates and all of that, specifically for like those bigger things. Have you ever tried anything like that? Or I don't know exactly what you pack in terms of food, but
So I'll take a mixture of some of the freeze-dried meals, and some of them get to be a little more calorie dense. Some of the ones I took this time, they're closer to about 900 calories each, which was pretty decent for that type of meal. But then I'll take some like granola bars and stuff like that just to have stuff on the go. And having the mixture of them is pretty good. But I don't know that it would be very possible to replenish the amount of calories I was burning.
yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. But, my energy lasted me through the whole trip. I spent 2 nights in a canyon that I've been revisiting every year for the past 6 years now. And it was in that canyon that I found my favorite photo of the trip. And it was actually pretty close to where I was camping, which was nice. But then I hiked back to the trailhead, and I wanted to visit a different canyon. And my campsite for the second part of the backpacking trip was maybe about 7 miles from where I was camped the first time, but I had to drive about 3 hours to access the trailhead to that particular location from kind of a different side. The one night that I stayed with my truck kind of before hiking into the new canyon I'd never been to before, it got so windy, man. It was like there's like wind blown sand. It was crazy. And I was loading film at the time.
Oh no.
Yeah, my Forerunners pointed into the wind, which was good. And I load film out of the back of my Forerunner, but I have my arms in the film changing tent. and I'm loading film, and the wind kicks up, and I just close my eyes because otherwise I'll just get, sand in my eyes. But, thankfully everything was fine, and there's, no dust getting into the film as I was loading it or anything like that.
Yeah, that could be bad.
But it was really, really windy. Have you guys had any any sort of strange weather so far this spring? Because it's been really, really windy out west.
We've been facing quite a bit of wind here. Not so much recently, though. It's weird because we're now just getting into like what I would consider spring, beginning of summer weather. Because for a while we'd be having highs of like 60, 70, and then it would drop down to like the 30s, 40s again. Like it was pretty drastic changes in temperature. But now we're finally like things are starting to level out a little bit.
Yeah, because it's just really weird. And I was talking to some other people when I was out in Utah, and they said that this was like one of the windiest springs that they've seen in a while, and it makes it challenging when shooting large format. Because there's a little saying that kind of goes through my mind when I'm out on these trips, which is when there's wind, there's clouds, and when there's clouds, there's wind. And both of those are not beneficial when I'm out shooting, because the clouds will kill the light, and then the wind will move the leaves, and I'm just sitting there waiting for a scene to improve. But there's always those little breaks in the wind and breaks in the dust and everything else that builds up. But I visited a new canyon, which was really fun, and I think I've mentioned this in the past episodes, where one of the things I really enjoy about visiting a location is learning the plants, the animals, and there's something about that allows you to get to know a location even better. And one of the things I found myself looking into this year was the geology of the locations and the different layers of sandstone and how old they are. And I just dove down that rabbit hole as soon as I got back. And I really learned to recognize the different types of sandstone and the geologic processes that exist in these areas, which gave me a whole new appreciation for the area. And I think it's one of the things as, landscape or, outdoor photographers, taking the time to really get to know the location. I think it makes it so much more, it gives a greater sense of appreciation for it. And so that was one of the things I did enjoy. And then the other thing too is I had mentioned in past episodes the first day funk, where I just have this. It's a little bit of perhaps a mini panic attack when going on these trips in the first day or so, and I didn't have it this time, or at least I didn't have it during the trip. I think I had it the day before I left. Probably maybe when we were talking about the trip, the upcoming trip on the previous episode, I maybe that kind of helped me kind of work my way through it a little bit. And I found that when I was on the trip this time, I approached everything with an enormous sense of gratitude for just being able to be in those places, to explore, to find photos. And it also made me realize how ridiculous the whole thing is, and the fact that I can now call this my career, and I'm in going to these places, and it shouldn't be possible. I shouldn't be able to make a living from this, but somehow I am. And so that was kind of a nice feeling to have.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very weird idea, even if you really get down and think about it, when we're selling prints, essentially too, or especially I should say, when we're selling prints, we're just selling people paper with ink on it. I mean, that's looking at it as a very exactly for what it is, and not necessarily the abstract idea of art, but still, to think that you were paid by people to make videos of you wandering the woods with silver gelatin or with gelatin on film and just a wooden camera, it's very odd to think about. And you bringing up the whole learning the geology of locations, it connects to this book that I just finished reading, Where the Crawdads Sing, which was...
I read that one.
Yeah. Just thinking about how the main character is in this marsh and learning so much about the marsh, just being so connected to her home and to nature as a whole, to the point where she knows more about that localized area than someone with a PhD in like that specific study. That just, it's amazing how our connection to nature helps to foster further education.
Yeah.
And how we can become so much better than what other people will be from reading books just by going out into the woods.
And I was thinking about, I think it's been probably a little over a year since I read that book, but I remember reading up on the author, and the author basically studied that environment, the plants, the animals, and everything, and that's how they approached it in terms of like, here's the environment, which is really almost one of the main characters in the novel, and then you have the human aspect of the story as well, but it really is a portrait of the environment because of all the author's knowledge of it. And it was just it was very interesting how descriptive it was and how you could just picture that place, even though it's not an environment I've ever visited in person.
And it also makes me think of your thinking with like how weird it is to be making money off of doing what you're doing, because then she ends up making money from books and that use her knowledge.
Yeah.
And that just, I think that ties hand in hand, the fact that you have someone who never studied anywhere, never had any formal education, but because of what she grew up around and what she knew, it helps her to make a living. And I'm sure that's just as abstract of a concept to her as it is, because it's much the same with art.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Another thing too, I have a question for you. Have you ever, when you're out taking photos in the field, have you ever ran into someone that you know that you had no clue would be there and they had no clue you'd be there?
I can't say that I have. I've run into photographers that then I've talked to and everything. Like, there was one instance where I was out with my camera and ran into another photographer, and it was, I think, one of the only instances, and we got talking, but didn't know him prior or anything. So no, I don't think I've ever run into people that I know on the trails.
Because that actually happened to me twice on this trip. Toward the end of the trip, after I had finished the backpacking portion, I drove over to Capitol Reef National Park, which is a really interesting national park. Not very developed, but just absolutely amazing geology there. And I was hiking into this canyon that I saw on some satellite maps, but I'd never been there before. I didn't really know what to expect. And I hiked in there. It's an absolutely beautiful canyon, these big, beautiful cottonwood trees and these white walls of sandstone and just really beautiful plants. And it's a harsh environment, yet everything felt so very soft. It was very interesting. But I was the only person in that canyon. I hadn't seen anyone else all day. I hiked in there in the morning, and then it was coming up on lunchtime, so I decided to head back to my truck. And as I'm hiking out of there, I see another hiker coming towards me. And then as they get a little closer, I realize I know exactly who it is. It's a photographer I know. His name's Lauren, and shoots both large format and shoots digital as well. And so we're talking for a while, and neither of us had been in that canyon before. Neither of us knew that each other, either of us was in Utah or was in Capitol Reef. Yet we happened to bump into each other in some obscure canyon in the middle of nowhere. And when I got back to my truck that evening, there was a note on my truck from another photographer I know who happened to be passing through. His name's Jim Becia, and he's really talented large format photographer from Wisconsin. And he just happened to be passing through and saw me there as well. Well, at least saw my truck there. But I seem to run into these situations quite a bit where there's photographers I know, we bump into each other, we had no knowledge we would be there. But it also gets me thinking that as creative and as unique as we all think we are, maybe not quite as much. There is a similar thought process that kind of leads us all to some of these areas. So I thought it was just fascinating to run into people I knew in a place that I didn't know.
I think a large part of that is playing into where you are too, being out west and being in specifically Utah, which is such a diverse area that a lot of people flock to.
Yeah.
I mean, even like in the back canyons, I don't think I get that over here simply because, I mean, it's much like in the middle of the country where you have like just flat land. People don't think of those states as photographic ideals, much like they don't think of Pennsylvania as like a photographic or a place to go and photograph specifically. There's no like massive landmarks or anything. So I think that plays at least a part into your running into people and mine not.
I could definitely see how that would be the case. And actually, when you're talking about how place like Pennsylvania, other areas that may not have the iconic landmarks that are out in the West, I've never done any photography out there. All my photography has been in the West. So it does get me thinking in terms of, there's got to be so much. I would imagine that I'd do decently well in an environment where there aren't iconic subjects. 'Cause I try to avoid the iconic stuff anyways, just because I find that the images they're not very personal. I'm not very invested in those subjects. So the thought of being in an area where there really aren't any icons, and I would think that might give a little more encouragement to scout around and to find those sort of subjects that really do relate to you, or you're invested in them emotionally for one reason or another. But I've never tried photographing in that environment before, but I would think that would be probably my experience, perhaps.
Which, like we've talked about in previous episodes too, all comes down to mindset.
Yeah.
Because if you come into a place like Pennsylvania thinking that it's going to be just as quote unquote easy to get a portfolio worthy photograph, so to speak, as it would be out west where you have the mountains and the stereotypical beautiful views, you're not going to come away with anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I find after 8 years of photographing in Pennsylvania, it is hard. Like, you have to really be of a particular mindset and just understand that the scenes that you are going to capture are not going to be like anything that you see typically on the popular pages of like social media.
Yeah. I would imagine that a photographer like Alex Burke would do very well there, because of the tremendous work that he does in the plains. And it seems like wherever he goes, he just finds very good stuff. So it would actually be very interesting to see him work an area like Pennsylvania or some of the other areas over there. It would would be very fascinating to see.
Yeah, he's been over my way a couple times. I think 2019 was the last time that he was, at least that I was paying attention and was aware. That's when he came up to New York for a little while. Photographed, I think, Tohannock Falls, which I wanted to go meet up with him at that point, but didn't work out. But he's done some photographs, I think, in the forests of Pennsylvania here and there. Not a lot, but I know that he also went down to Shenandoah down in Virginia and did pretty well down there. So yeah, he's always done pretty well with, like you said, with all of his work.
Yeah.
Especially photographing the plains. I mean, when you are able to make a beautiful photograph from just grain silos and the stuff that people would pass by thinking, why do we even have that in the modern day? And when you can make a photograph out of that people actually want to hang on their walls, then yeah, you're going to be able to make a photograph out of pretty much anything.
Yeah, I mean the beautiful light, the skies, the soft pastel tones. I typically avoid man-made subjects. I'm not sure why that is necessarily, but his work is such a wonderful mix of. I mean, obviously there's the full-on wilderness images, but in the context of the grain silos and all the interesting stuff that he finds out there, just you could substitute just like any sort of thing in there that's natural, whether it's mountains, lakes, or whatever. It's all about the light, the composition, and it just looks so very effortless, and it doesn't, even though in those cases it's man-made subjects, it comes across very peaceful, very natural, and it gives me the same sort of feeling I'd get if I was looking at a wilderness image. And I think it takes a lot of talent and a lot of skill to soften those sort of man-made structures in a way that makes them so very photogenic.
Yeah, there was an article back in April on Petapixel that talked about like the pure landscape photography versus including the human element. And I always thought that it was interesting to the idea of including something that's man-made versus something that's not. And I kind of battle a thin line with that. A lot of the structures that I find, like I have interest in photographing like abandoned buildings and that kind of thing, but then I struggle with calling myself a landscape photographer or a nature photographer, because then it's not truly nature as the main subject. And so a lot of the stuff that I photograph that has the human element in it is stuff that I find in the woods. It has to be just as immersed in the nature as what I am.
That's along the same lines of what I've done. I only have one photo that has a man-made element in it. I'm kind of thinking back. I know I have one. Maybe there could be something else, but I'm pretty sure it's just one. It was a photo up in the redwoods, and it's a beautiful scene, a very lush green as one would expect to find in the redwoods. A trail leading kind of from the foreground kind of into the midground, and there's this some sort of deciduous tree that has this big overarching limb, and then in the background you see just the front little bit of a bridge that goes over a creek. And that particular subject would be perfectly fine if it didn't have the bridge in there. It would have been just as effective. I think the bridge adds perhaps a little bit of a sense of mystery, but I avoided photographing that scene when I first found it, because I almost felt like it was whoever built the bridge built it at that particular area because it was their vision for the scene. And it could just be that was just the best place to put the bridge, and all the other trees and stuff happened to just be there. But knowing how trail builders oftentimes will build the trail to give people certain specific views, at first I avoided photographing that scene because I felt like it wasn't my work. I felt like it was the work of whoever built the trail, whoever built the bridge. And it was almost too easy of a composition, too well crafted, almost like photographing something in a Disney park, that was created as opposed to something as I found it. But then when I returned on another year, I didn't find many other subjects, so I decided to photograph that scene, and I really liked the way that one turned out. But I think it would also be just fine if that bridge wasn't there.
I don't know if I agree with you on that. Because I'm looking at it now, and for those listening, it's titled Overarching on your With Trees gallery, and I'll put a link below too. But I don't know that I would agree, because I think that it really helps to make the photograph, like you said, to add that element of mystery. And yeah, the overarching tree is the main subject to it, but I don't think it's strong enough of a subject alone, where if instead of that path and instead of that tree, or instead of that bridge rather, you just had a bunch of continuous brush or bramble.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely, I don't know how you think on it, but I know a lot of times I'll look back at photographs and yeah, I may feel similarly to how you do with this bridge, where the photograph would be fine without it, but I think it's the bridge that stopped you and made you take the photograph.
Which is true.
Without it, you would have just kind of passed it by more easily and not had gone back to it so many times.
And I could see how it does add a little bit of a sense of mystery, since you can't see where the bridge leads. You just see the steps leading up to it. It's a little bit overgrown with regard to some plants growing among the treads of the steps, but you can't really see where it is. So I guess the bridge in this case adds perhaps that little sense of mystery of kind of what's around the next corner. And I do see how if there was no bridge there, the trail may not give enough of a compelling question as to what's around the corner, because it'd probably get lost in the greenery.
Plus, if the bridge wasn't there, would there be a trail?
Very true. and actually, in the context of something that we spoke about in the past, this particular scene, about a 30-second walk from the road. So it's not off in the, it's not 4 or 5 miles or 15 miles down some trail. It's really quite next to the road. Which is the other reason why when I saw that scene for the first time, I'm like, this is too good to be true. This has got to be a scene that's photographed on like the park, brochure or something like that, because it feels like it was a scene that was created, and in a sense it was, as opposed to something that was completely natural that I just happened to stumble upon. And I think that's one of my conflicts when it comes to photographing man-made subjects. I feel like it's sort of taking credit for the work of others, as opposed to discovering something with my eyes for the first time and seeing something in it that someone else didn't see.
I know when it comes to the woods, especially around me, with state parks and such, that a lot of it is maintained by individuals. So, and obviously the same goes with national parks and everything.
Yeah.
So I find it curious that you don't think of it much the same. That you think of like this bridge, for instance, being in there as you photographing something that you can't take credit for, but the trails that you go on to, and maybe not necessarily that you in particular, since you're more in the back country, so to speak, of it, but still, that there's people maintaining these trails and working to make them better for the public. And even when you photograph using them or right aside of them, or you know what I'm saying, that you don't take the that same approach to it.
Yeah, and I could totally see that. And I do. It's definitely an interesting question. Like when it comes to the trails and stuff, I think some of the more developed. Well, I gotta give a lot of credit to the people that do create the trails, and certainly that also maintain them, because especially in a wooded environment, I know it takes a lot of effort. But in some cases, it feels like in this scene, it feels like it was too perfect. I think is something that, and sometimes that makes it feel like it's someone else's vision as opposed to my own.
Yeah, I can see that.
So there was another thing that came up when I was on my trip, and this is something I'll also be curious to hear your thoughts on as well. But when I am on the photography trips, I oftentimes have very vivid dreams, and especially when I'm on the backpacking trips. And I think I've mentioned this a little bit in the past, but in this particular case, I had this very interesting dream. I was backpacking in the Second Canyon. It was the first time I had ever visited that canyon. It was about a 7.5 mile hike to get into the canyon, and then I'm camped along a river, so it's really good sleep. There's the wind through the cottonwood trees above. There's the sound of the river nearby. But I will have these absolutely vivid, absolutely bizarre dreams. And I had this dream that my wife and I adopted a rescue wolf. And it was this massive black wolf, huge, like massive wolf. And it was very bitey. And it just went through my mind the whole time, like going like, this is a terrible idea. We shouldn't have rescued this giant, bitey, muscular wolf. And I just find that when I go on these dreams, when I go on these trips, I have these very vivid dreams. And I don't know if there's any sense to them at all. This one I couldn't make any sense to. I mean, we adopted a dog about a year ago, but he's not a wolf and he's not bitey. But have you had any experiences like that?
No, not
specifically.
Yeah. Not specifically, no.
Yeah.
I also don't go, or I haven't yet gone on a bunch of trips like how you do, where I have like one trip a year for camping is pretty much all that I have managed to get in. This year, I'm hoping to make it a little bit different. So yeah. I can't necessarily say that I have, but perhaps that will change in the future. Yeah. I'm kind of hoping I don't have dreams about adopting a giant wolf dog that's bitey. But
it makes for an interesting experience. I will say I do look forward to those. And then the other thing that happens, and I can't remember if I've mentioned this in the past, but when I get home from the trips, I will often have dreams I'm still in the field. Have I mentioned that in the past?
I don't think so.
Okay. So it's a really weird thing that happens. It happens almost every single time after I come back from a trip. I'll just be, it'll be 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'll have a dream that I am still in the field, but that I fell asleep in like a slot canyon or something. And so I will actually sit up in bed, I'll look around me, and at this point I'm fully awake, but my mind is still a little bit asleep, and it sees everything around me in the darkened room. It looks like walls of sandstone. And it's absolutely bizarre, where I'm just sitting there looking around, and I cannot make sense of what I see. But then eventually I'll kind of look up, and then the night sky slowly becomes a ceiling fan. And or looking over to the right, there's a window there, and all of a sudden, like this patch of sandstone starts to look like a window, and I see a tree outside, where my brain finally figures out that I wasn't just like napping in a slot canyon. I fell asleep and I woke up in the middle of the night, but that I am in fact home. But it is absolutely bizarre. And it happens, I'd say, probably about half the time, for all the trips I go on. I come back and I'll just have that dream where I wake up. I'm like, all right, where am I now? Where did I fall asleep? And it's just absolutely bizarre. And just to see your brain try to figure things out, then you realize, oh, I'm back home again. But that's the other weird part about spending a lot of time in the field.
How long does that last? Is it just like the night after, or after you get back? Or?
Usually just like the night after, maybe for a second night. But there, like the last time it happened, and it happened a little bit on this trip, not fully, but I think it was maybe when I came back from my Death Valley trip or my Zion winter trip. My wife was just kind of like, she just like tapped me on the shoulder. She's like, "You're home," and I'm like, "Oh, okay." Because I was wondering why you were here too. It's like, why are you asleep in the slot canyon as well? It's just
I didn't bring you along.
Yeah, it's just a really bizarre. Like, why is the cat here? I don't know why the cat's here. I don't take the cat on trip, but it's just absolutely bizarre. I've never done drugs in my life, but I have a feeling that might give some sort of a look into when your senses and your brain, you can't quite figure out what's going on. But yeah, if you go on some more trips and spend a lot of time in the field, maybe you will have some odd experiences like that as well. It's an odd one.
I think that ties into just how immersed you are in the field too. I mean, the fact that you're paying attention to so much and absorbing so much information that your brain, when you finally come back, it has to do something with it.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I can't say that I've ever woken up in my bedroom thinking that I was out in the middle of the woods, or that I adopted a pet bear, for instance. But like you said, maybe in a couple months, I do a couple trips this summer and everything, and we'll be recording and talking about how I adopted, I don't know, some kind of weird animal, and see how that goes. But I can't say for now.
It makes it very interesting. That is for sure. But I will say also another thing too on the topic of the backpacking trip. I got my entire kit down to about 34 pounds. I know I'd mentioned that in the past. It was so nice being able to hike around, and it didn't feel like very much weight at all that I was carrying. And one tip I'll pass on that worked out pretty well in terms of getting my bag to be relatively compact, because it's about I think a 64 liter pack that I have, which is a fairly small pack. But I put the sleeping bag, my puffy jacket, my cooking pot, the sleeping pad, all that sort of stuff at the bottom of the pack. Middle of the pack is where you should have a little bit more of the weight there, because it's right up against your back. It's a little bit better balance. So I had the Chamonix 8x10 and then 4 film holders. And then on top of that, at the very, very top, I have my tent, which is a very, very lightweight tent. But all the other stuff like the lenses, the light meter, the stopwatch, all the shooting stuff, I just wrapped all that stuff up inside my dark cloth. And then I just kind of put that bundle of stuff on top of the camera and the film holders, and then the tent on top of that. And it was very well balanced. And the dark cloth being able to serve double duty in terms of, keeping all the stuff somewhat organized, but also, serving as the actual dark cloth. That worked out pretty well. But it was an absolute joy hiking with the very lightweight kit that I had. And so I was very, very happy with how that worked out. So it'll be interesting, because I know that you have some backpacking trips are coming up at some point, so in some extended hiking, and so it'll be interesting to see how you do with that, and what kind of weight you're able to keep your kit to. But I will say that, man, all the things I did to lower the weight, my knees very much appreciated it.
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, I got that trip coming up. Memorial Day weekend is when we're going to be doing an overnight backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail.
Nice.
Yeah, so he actually got the same bag that I have,
Mm-hmm.
which is the Gregory Baltora 65 liter.
Okay, so about the same size pack I have. That's cool.
Yeah, which has actually worked out pretty nice the few times that I've had on the trail since getting it. I just have one of those, I think it's Tanoba bags for my lenses, or for my lens, my filters, all of that stuff that I throw into, and I just put my camera, because it has that Chamonix carrying case that it comes with.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. So I just put that on top of the Tanoba, just in the middle of the pack, with my dark cloth rolled up aside of it, and that's worked out pretty well. The only thing that I'm unsure of is in terms of packing like more into it, because of the fact that this bag only has 2 sections. So it's the main pack, and then it has a separated like sleeping bag compartment on the bottom. And I kind of wish that there was a third separator, so like for the very top, which I know that your Denali bag has. I think in 3 sections like that.
Yeah, and the top is what I would put the food in, because it was pretty lightweight and all that. But also I wasn't hiking in bear country, so
yeah. So I wish that it had those 3 separations, but for this trip in particular, instead of doing tents, we're just doing we got hammocks.
Oh, cool.
That we're gonna try out. Yeah, he got one that we ended up getting the same one because he got it about a month ago. And him and his girlfriend really just love it and say that it's super comfortable and everything, and it is pretty cheap at like $40 or so. So I picked one up and was waiting for the weather to cooperate a little bit to set it up, but should be interesting to see how things turn out.
Yeah.
But it'll be nice because I don't have to carry everything by myself.
Yeah.
So in terms of my pack, it will be a lot lighter.
Well, that's good.
But how did that Chamonix work out for you then? Because this is the first trip that you took it on, right?
Yeah, first trip I took it on, and it was an absolute joy to use. It's different from my Arca Swiss, and for those that aren't familiar, this Chamonix, it's a folding wooden camera, but it was a joy to work with. Very smooth. I know that when it comes to camera stuff, people get all like invested in gear, and that's never been my style. I know it's never been your style. But when you have something that is nice to work with, and I am not a musician, but I can only imagine it's just like having a good instrument where you don't think about it. It does its thing, and that's all that really matters. Yeah.
Extension of your hand.
So yeah, it was a joy to work with. I was very happy. There's no real surprises, which is always good. And I got my film back from the lab. There's one photo I really like. The other ones, they're okay. But it's this new canyon I went into. It's like, it's a bit like, it's a place I'm going to return to year after year. So this was only my first taste of what this canyon has to offer, and I left many photos on the table in terms of scenes that I walked right past that I very could well have taken photos of, but I felt good just kind of leaving those for future visits. So it was delightful. It was a lot of work, but it was absolute pleasure being there, and I was very grateful for the opportunity to go there and to see that, especially learning more about the geology and how the sandstone was laid down during the like Jurassic period. And it was just absolutely fascinating to dig deep into that. And one thing that I wanted to talk about here, and it's something I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on as well. Once I get back from the trip, I go through, I scan all the images, and I have them on the computer. But I have a question for you. When you're editing some scans of your images on the computer. What color background do you use when you're doing your editing?
I think it's like the medium gray.
Medium gray?
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of editing recently, past when I rescanned my film, but most of that was just copy and pasting settings for the most part. So I haven't done anything that major, especially since getting this new MacBook.
Mm-hmm.
So things might change, but for the most part, if I remember right, it's mainly like medium gray.
And that's what I used to do, which always worked well. And it's certainly like kind of the default. I think Photoshop now goes even towards a darker gray as a default. But I've really enjoyed editing on a white background. And I think it's because it replicates a little bit more of what that image will look like on paper. Because you have something to compare the light tones in the image to as a known, like, this is as compared to white as opposed to as compared to gray. And so that's one thing that I don't think a lot of people edit on a white background. And I can see how it might seem like, it's going to be hard on your eyes because you have this harsh contrast. But I think if you have the monitor brightness set pretty well, to me, that gives me the most accurate feeling for how the print is going to be. And another thing too is I found that if I'm editing in Photoshop, if I bring up two photos at the same time and have them kind of split screen on the monitor, I find that it's really good to have kind of like the buddy system if I'm editing a photo that is a little bit difficult to edit. Now, this might be something, I can see how this could be something very perhaps unique to working with color images. With black and white, I don't know that it would hold up quite as much. But if there's an image I'm trying to just fine tune to make it look as natural as possible, maybe correcting for a color cast or something, if I have another image that's kind of in the same sort of ballpark kind of subject on the screen, it gives me something to kind of switch between in terms of just switch my attention to and to compare to it. And somehow that buddy system of having the two images on the screen allows me to be a little bit more decisive when editing. It allows me to spot if things are a little bit not quite right. And I can't imagine. Well, maybe it does work for black and white as well. Have you ever tried that at all?
No, and like you were saying, I think it's a lot to do with maintaining an accurate representation between like the natural scene and how it was. I think in terms of like color cast and make sure that you're getting rid of that, especially if you're working with like negative color films.
Yeah.
I can see though in terms of doing that for maintaining tonality in black and white, making sure that you're not going overboard with how dark you are, especially if you're working on, say, a specific series of images that you want to make more cohesive. But no, I can't say that I've tried that before.
Yeah, I see how it could be really more beneficial for color, just because there's some more subtle tweaking that has to be done. But there's another thing too, which is something I always do when I come back from my trips. I'll scan all the images. I'll leave all the tabs open in Photoshop. And then I'll just kind of go through them rapid fire. Like I'll flip to one of the tabs, get that first impression, do a couple little tweaks, go to the next one, and just kind of keep going through that rotation. And that's the other thing I find to be very beneficial is editing a lot of them at once to get that first little glimpse and get that first impression and kind of edit based on that. And that's, I may have mentioned that in the past, but that's something that I've been doing over the past few days now that I have these images back. Just going through and just doing that rapid fire, a little tweak of the curves, a little tweak of the saturation, moving on to the next one, and eventually everything kind of falls into line.
See, when I'm editing my images, I'll go through And I try and give it a couple days after I develop my film, and then I'll start to actually look at them more, and I'll take out my phone, I'll take a photo, then invert it to get an idea of like the base tonalities of it. And then once I scan them in, I'll do kind of like how you are going through rapid fire. I'll just do quick edits to everything, and then that gives me an idea of, once it's getting closer to what I want it, is the composition still holding up? Is the image as a whole still working for me? And then I don't know if you do this too. At some point during it, once I have it at least close to what I want, and I've started to narrow down the images that I deem as keepers, I'll go ahead and I'll print just a small like 8x10 or 4x5 of them. And then I'll hang them on my wall and give it a couple days then. And just by looking through them, I find that helps me to get a better idea of whether it's an image that I truly want to represent my photography as a whole, and whether I would be comfortable selling that print to someone. Because at the end of the day, my images, I try and make as close for print as possible.
Yeah, I do something kind of similar. It's really in the context of printing some proof images at roughly 8x10 for the box sets, and I will live with those images for quite a while. So it's after I've edited things to the point where I'm pretty happy with it, I'll make a test print, and I got a stack of like 7 prints sitting on top of my scanner right now, where I'll pick them up every now and then, look through them. I'll sometimes have them hung up on this bookcase with some magnets, just to keep looking at them and look at them in different light, and I think really it's a matter of just seeing if the feeling I get when I look at that printed image is really what I have in mind in terms of what I was feeling at that moment or anything along those lines. So maybe not necessarily like a technical aspect, but just, does this image still give me that feeling that I want it to? And there's something about seeing the image on paper that is there's so much more nuance than seeing it on a screen. And sometimes I can see an image on the screen and not really think too much of it, but when you see it on paper, it gives you a whole different perception over it. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us by email at cody@codyschultz.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.